Come on. Oh, this thing is going to be a pain. Okay, the intro's not playing. I'll put it in the afterwards. Okay, welcome to the Legion of Reason, and you won't see me for a few more seconds because this thing is... Let me start it over again. What the heck? Let me do that. Let me just do that.
I still see the dinosaurs upside down. Is that...
Yeah, I'll fix that when I get in there. Okay, now we're going. Yeah, I'm just going to ignore doing the intro. And we're not recording. There we go. We're recording the audio now. Good. Okay, now why am I frozen?
Yeah, me too.
What's going on here? What's going on here? Okay, let me kill this. Oh, it unfroze on me just as I hit exit. Sure you will. Okay, we're gonna... Give me a few seconds, folks. All right, here we go. Darn, because recently this has been going really smoothly.
No worries, I'm not...
I just got ahead of myself. We actually are streaming right now, and people are listening to me jabbering on about my technical issues. Anyway, okay.
I see you now.
Okay, good. It's coming up. It's not streaming yet. Come on. Oh my goodness, come on. Oh, OBS is crashing on me. This is the first. I've never run into this problem. Let's try it again. There we go. Yay! Oh, it's not in the stream. Oh, come on. Let me opening. Let's start this. Just pretend we're starting over. Because that's exactly what I'm gonna do here. All right, let's try it again. Come on, you can do it. Shoot. Okay, pretend that the last couple of minutes hasn't happened, and welcome once again to the Legion of Reason diversion coming to you from Alberta, Canada, and we have a special edition of the Regressive Left Files joining Christine and
Hello.
Me tonight is Dr. Colin Wright, Eberly Research Fellow at Penn State University, which sounds like a prison actually, kind of. Yeah, so welcome to the podcast. We're going to be talking we'll start talking about some of your research interests, and then we'll go on to the topic du jour, which is the problem of trans women in sport, and even
good.
stickier wicket, which is castersemia, which is that's... I don't know. There's no good solution there, but at least I don't think so. Maybe our guest has another idea on that. Anyway, welcome, Colin, and
thank you.
Yeah, so you study the behavior of social insects and spiders. There's social spiders?
That is correct. There are. There's not many of them. There's only about maybe between 25 and 30 species of social spider. So normally they're just kind of, you think of spiders as the solitary, either in their webs or some sit and wait thing like a tarantula or something, but they live in groups too.
Oh, okay. Where? I've never actually seen any of these, at least I don't think so.
Yeah, so most of the ones, there's some in the U.S., but they're more on the East Coast, and then you kind of go down the East Coast, and then in South America there's several different closely related species.
Oh.
The one I study, though, is actually from South Africa or Southern Africa area, so like Namibia, South Africa, Botswana. But there's a few closely related species that are down there, too. Then there's certain different degrees of social arachnids all around the world to varying degrees.
Oh, well, is that kind of behavior from some kind of common ancestry with social insects, or is it
No,
developed on its own?
they're pretty distantly related. So, yeah, they got a couple hundred million years separating them apart. Most of the social spiders, a lot of them, I think it's independently evolved. I want to say about 5 or 6 times, just in spiders generally, and only among a few close related groups too.
So it's a good trick, as Daniel Dennett would say.
Yeah, I mean
Coming up
it can be.
again and again.
Yeah, it's a useful strategy for certain times, but sometimes what we see with social spiders is sometimes they're kind of like evolutionary dead ends because they tend to have to evolve sociality to solve certain riddles about their environment, like collecting large amounts of food. And so once they're social, they're kind of stuck into this one way of life, and then if the environment changes, then there goes all your social spiders. So it's kind of it's seen as sort of a dead end sometimes for these groups. It also usually requires a lot of inbreeding as well. So it's pretty fun to study though.
Okay, so there's subpopulations are pretty common amongst these social groups.
Oh yeah.
Oh, okay.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that makes sense. But it's any parallels with humans?
I mean, yeah. So what I specifically study in both social spiders and insects, as I study personality basically, and so what this is, it's just defined as repeatable differences in behavior between individuals. So, we kind of think about it colloquially with humans or our pets, and we know that no two dog behaves the same way, and they'll behave consistently a certain way for their whole lives, whether or not they're like more aggressive or more docile or they're more sociable and things like that. But I study this personality in sort of a social context. So I'm looking at something like I have a big spider colony with 100 spiders in it, and I want to know what's the behavioral distribution of all the individuals within this colony. And once we find that out, then we can make artificial colonies composed of, say, like a 100% bold colony and a 100% shy colony, and then every kind of variation in between. And then we can get a good idea of how the societies are structuring themselves with respect to this personality variation. Are they better at solving certain colony tasks like collecting food or caring for young? And this also has been applied to humans as well. We see it in some studies in corporations where they're trying to have team building, and you want to have you don't want to have a bunch of introverts all in one team. You need to have sort of an optimal mix of certain personality types. So a lot of companies are using this type of research to make their groups for a sales project or something, because the personality types in the group definitely matter.
Yeah, funny you should say team building. I'm so not a team player. I'm the kind. We were at Beer Fest last night, and there was a couple of these pedal tours where you have a big thing and everybody pedals, and I'd be the guy who's faking the pedaling, taking advantage of the group. A little game theory there. It would be.
We see it happens in the animals too. You get a lot of. They call them inquilines. They're individuals that'll kind of remain outside the colony and just take advantage of all the benefits of the group for catching prey, but they're just doing their own thing.
Yeah, so. Yeah, that's kind of sociopathic, I suppose, in a sense, but
yeah, a little bit.
I'm just lazy. That's my only reason. I'm not really sociopathic, but I'm not exactly an extrovert either, like Christine there.
That's the extrovert. It's also property of ants. There's actually some ants they call lazy ants because there's about anywhere up to 80% or more of the colony. Like none of the workers are doing anything, and no one can figure out why there's just a bunch of lazy ants in these colony. I mean, there's some ideas they have about like reserve workforces, but they're literally called lazy ants.
I think that it may just be the spectrum of behavior that it's part of that spectrum, and that's the way it is. It might not be adaptationist at all. It's always that game theory battle between the I'm not going to say good and bad, but those that do for the group and those that take advantage of the group.
Oh yeah, there's going to be cheaters.
There's always going to be some stable populations of each.
Yeah, absolutely.
And yeah, it's kind of interesting reading up on group theory, or not group theory. That's totally different. Game theory.
Yeah, that was some of the stuff that got me interested in sort of the social behavior in the first. And I guess evolution in general too. Yeah, it's fascinating stuff.
Because you have to produce testable hypotheses and then actually go out and get the data. Yeah. So to start off with this, getting into the trans women in sport. I mean, you wrote for Quillette. Quillette. Yeah. I'm never really sure how to pronounce that, but it's just double L. So Quillette, and you wrote an article. It was called. Refresh my memory.
The New Evolution Deniers.
Yes, the New Evolution Deniers on most, the left, which is, both sides, both ends of the spectrum are, one end of the spectrum denies climate science, and the other end denies biology, really, as a whole, and the implications of evolutionary behavior. I mean, you got people like Cordelia Fine, who say that there is no such thing as I was going to say gendered brain, but it's not right. Sexual dimorphism in brain function and anatomy. It's not even true. She's wrong. It's something that is just coming to the fore, and we saw with I've run into these people where they claim that after hormone therapy that trans women basically become women, which is weird because their fat goes to the right places, etc. And the problem with that is that that's true, but those are perturbations on top of a frame that developed as a man, and these are lasting effects. It's not magic.
I feel like that's something that kind of gets lost in the greater discussion. Is people, they're constantly saying, well, if you just lower testosterone down to, I think it used to be 10 nanomoles per liter, now it's I think around 5. But this idea that you can simply lower current levels of testosterone down to the level that you see in females, and then that'll essentially erase the entire male advantage. Whereas what they're not taking account for is it's not just current testosterone that matters for how strong you are at any given moment, but also how testosterone has guided the development of your body from adolescence through puberty until adulthood. And simply taking cross-sex hormones or puberty blockers, they don't reverse how tall you are, how long your arms are, your lung to body ratios, and all those things that definitely matter for athletic ability in sports. So that's something that seems to get totally glossed over in this whole thing is we can't just focus on current testosterone. It's got to be past, and that needs to actually be front and center, I think, in this whole debate. Yeah,
that's and that comes up when we talk about Caster Semenya, because even if she, we'll talk about it now. We'll talk about it a bit. I want to do something first, and I'm going to give two different points of view. I should have done this to begin with, but before I do that, I just want to do a little thing for people watching.
Yeah. Today's secret word is testosterone.
All right. For those of you playing at home, I just gave you the secret word. All right. So, okay. Anyway, this is two opposing viewpoints. Now, you were on a television program with Jen Smith, and she says this.
People are confusing gender with sex.
Right.
So sex is a biological reality, okay, and that's in your body, and you're either XX or XY, and that's something that cannot be changed. But when we are talking transgender issues today, we have a lot of people who are assuming that because you switch genders, that changes your sex. Well, that's not true.
Right.
Sorry about that. That's
It's all good. We heard it.
You got, but that's a perfectly reasonable viewpoint.
Oh yeah, no, Jen is great. She's now banned from Twitter. I don't know if you know about that.
Seriously, why?
She was banned not too long after that because she started arguing with trans activists. So she's been gone for maybe a month or so now.
Jeez. Wow. Permanent ban?
Yeah. Permanent ban.
Oh man.
Yeah.
That's a whole other kettle of fish. One of these times we'll open that one. Yeah. It's really, that's just terrible.
Yeah, that's bad. She was a really powerful voice in that whole.
Yeah, but I get the feeling that she is against activists that promote this whole no biological sex thing because it hurts transgender movement, and I think it does.
Well, Well, Jen is. She's not a trans activist. She's just someone who wants to live her life as a trans woman. And with taking all the facts that entails about how, her distinction between sex and gender, which is definitely something that's completely glossed over, or just they're equivocated between constantly. You see a lot of these trans activists, and they'll constantly be flipping through sex and gender. So if I'll say something like, this individual is a female or a male, they'll be like, no, they're a woman. And it's like, well, you can see they're changing the terms that I'm using. I'm using a biological term, and I always try to avoid gender language. I always try to stick to words that are, male and female when I'm talking about sex.
Yes.
But then they'll latch on to that, and they'll say, like, they'll switch it to man and woman, which for them means something completely different than I'm doing.
Mm-hmm.
So it's something to stay.
Well, that's one thing that Jen was very careful about, in not to conflate the two and stick to separate terms that aren't confusing, and I think she's totally right on that.
Yeah, absolutely.
I want to play the other one, but I'm scared that the same thing is about to happen.
Go for it.
Basically.
Yeah, it's gonna do it. I'm gonna play it, but I gotta fix it somewhere.
Everybody had a joint today?
Yeah. Nope. All right, I'm gonna try that now.
Basically.
It's still happening. It's
not troublesome, Randy.
It's not troublesome. Okay, I'll just play it then.
It's just an echo. Yeah.
Yeah, I know.
Basically, it's not correct that there is such a thing as biological sex, and I'm a historian of medicine. I can unpack that for you at great length if you want, but in the interest of time, I won't. So that's a very popular misconception.
What do you say to someone who says this?
I would say, please, the floor is yours. Unpack that at length. Just do the work that you're claiming you can do, because that's about as extreme a claim as anyone could ever make with a straight face.
But you're seeing this more and more, and it seems to be within the last year, 2 years, that it's coming up everywhere. And coming out of people who should know better. They know something about science. This is the amazing thing. I don't know what to say about these people.
I'd say that when you drill down with these people who are saying things like male and female don't exist, if you actually start engaging with them on this claim, they'll always kind of fall back on this argument that there's no single trait that is going to be 100% diagnostic that can cleanly and definitively separate males from females, where there's no one going to be left in the middle. And because you can't create these two completely separate boxes, therefore, it's just our brains that are just coming up with these. We're just pattern-seeking brains, and we're just creating these. We're socially constructing these categories. But that's just an entirely fallacious way of looking at things. I had a Twitter thread recently that explained what this fallacy is. It's called the univariate fallacy, where it's basically that claim that if you can't pinpoint a single trait or a single factor that's responsible for creating two different categories or resulting in a certain effect, then those categories or that effect are essentially not real in some way or socially constructed. But the fact is, there are differences between males and females, and we can use some traits, like if we just want to use chromosomes alone, well, that's going to account for 99.98% of what we consider males and females. And if we want to go and break things down even more, we can talk about whether someone's a genetic male, if they have a Y chromosome, or if they're if there's a mismatch between their their sex phenotype and their genotype. We can make these distinctions, and they're not difficult. So an example I usually give of this univariate fallacy is, you could say something like, there's no difference whatsoever. There's no single defining trait that separates a male face from a female face, even though they've done studies where they've covered people's hair and they've told them no makeup or anything, clean shaven, and people are able to identify male and female faces within a few seconds, upward close to almost 100% of the time. And so what's going on there? If we were to look at any single trait, if we were just to look at, say, like the shape of your nose, well, if you're only looking at nose shape, maybe you're not going to get up to close to 100%. Maybe you'll get it right 70% of the time. Or if you just look at how prominent your brow ridge is, maybe you'll get that right 80% of the time. But if you take into account your nose shape, brow ridge prominence, eye depth, jaw structure, if you take all these factors in at once, then you can almost with certainty accurately predict the sex of an individual. And what we're doing in our daily lives, when I look at a face, and my brain immediately is doing this multivariate analysis and is looking at all these traits at once and kind of just getting a sort of a gestalt of the brain, and it's saying male or female. And so this is how we need to start classifying things. We can't just fall for this fallacy because we can't separate these groups cleanly with a single factor, then therefore these categories are essentially figments of our imagination and don't exist. That's the biggest fallacy that is going on in this arena. And it's not just with sex too, it's other things as well.
I was saying that I wanted to run by you an explanation for all of this, and I think my hypothesis is that a lot of this is based in fear of what's happened in the past, when there was discrimination, when men and women's careers, behaviors, etc., they were codified into two separate, well separated patterns, and it's binary as opposed to based on population statistics like we would now. And there's this fear that it would return to that if we actually acknowledge differences between the sexes. I don't know. Is that a reasonable hypothesis?
Yeah, I think you're right on the basis of their fear, and I'll be the first to say that their aspirations are honorable. They're trying to they're trying to make sure discrimination isn't happening, but the way they're going about this is completely backwards. So the way forward in this question to address things like discrimination based on individual and group differences, the solution isn't to say that, well, there is no difference between these groups. And that's what they're trying to do right now. They're trying to make claims that the differences themselves don't exist. So there's just the basis for any sort of discrimination has no material basis. These groups aren't even real. They're just figments of your imagination. Where instead what we should be doing is acknowledging that individuals differ in many different traits. We can identify groups by certain traits, but none of these traits should be used as a diagnostic on the humanity of a certain group. Mm-hmm. So we need to be able to, it just goes back to Martin Luther King. We just judge individuals or groups by the content of their character, rather than these. Yeah, exactly. We just need to be evaluating. Give them each the opportunity. Make sure there's equality of opportunity and not this equality of outcome that we kind of see being championed nowadays.
Yeah, exactly.
And if you're just going to ignore that people are different, or that there aren't such thing as racial differences, say between certain groups. I mean, this isn't the way forward. This is it's just denying reality to try to fit a narrative, rather than trying to just kind of go above that and just say only treat people on the way that their that their character is providing evidence for.
I just wanted to. Oh, here's a. I love this. There we go to browser. Sharon Davies was dismayed because a trans power lifter smashes women's world records. Nine world records. Shock and surprise. Are you at all? I mean, it's amazing that people allow this. How does this?
Yeah.
How does sport allow this?
I don't know if you've seen. There's been a quick follow up to this actually. I can't remember the guy's name. He's the president basically of the powerlifting association that this trans woman supposedly beat the world records in.
Yeah, is that
he
JC
recently
Cooper?
came out. That's JC Cooper right there.
Yeah, this is JC Cooper, but it's another powerlifter. But go ahead.
Yeah, but so the president of that powerlifting association came out with a statement just 2 or 3 days ago, basically that said that this person did not declare what their sex status beforehand going into it, and so but after they win a competition, they're subjected to like a drug test and like a DNA test or something, which they didn't pass because they're biologically male. And so they're not giving her these world records. So
that's something.
It's been stayed.
But a lot of people. Okay, here's one from. This is our actual. Minister of Science that said this. This is Kirsty Duncan. Whoops. Let me go back to Kirsty Duncan is our Minister of Science, and she was commenting on the Castor Semenya story, which we're going to talk about in a few minutes here. Let me go back. Special, and here it is. Should be. Oh, it's not going to show. Sure. Okay. I'll do it by this way. Okay. No sport organization should be deciding who is a woman or what makes a woman. It seems to me that there are two things wrong with this. Nobody's questioning whether Castor Semenya is a woman. We're saying is that she's got a leg up. It's people are making a false equivalence between someone has longer arms or longer legs, etc. At that level, there isn't much difference in the length of women's legs in running the 800. But here we go. Testosterone. Testosterone is a sledgehammer.
Yeah.
It makes a world of difference. I mean, if you look at the concentrations of testosterone between men and women have somewhere 6 to 60 nanograms per deciliter, and is that right? Deciliter or deciliter? It's deciliter, right?
Yeah, I usually go by the nanomoles per liter, so I don't know.
And in men, it's an order of magnitude greater at 300.
Oh yeah.
And it's amazing that people don't. The androgenic effects of testosterone are huge.
Yeah, there's actually some more details with Semenya's case. So before this recent ruling, there had been no sort of divulgence of her genetics in this case, or her chromosome makeup karyotype. But it's important to note that these new IAAF rules, they only apply to individuals who are XY and who have these differences of sexual development. Mm-hmm. So beforehand it was unclear, but per the new rules, any XX female is actually able to compete without any restrictions, even if they have natural hormone levels above 5 nanomoles per liter. So these rules only apply to XY individuals.
Interesting.
So the fact that Semenya is unable to compete means that she is a genetic male with a condition called PAIS. It's a partial androgen insensitivity disorder, So basically, she has a Y chromosome that's fully functional, but she has androgen receptors that are only partially sensitive to testosterone. So she didn't develop down a 100% male pathway through puberty because her receptors are only partially sensitive to testosterone, and so she is basically these are politically charged words, but she is basically a feminized male, and so because she's XY and she's that, and she has internal testes that are creating this high level of testosterone. Mm-hmm. So that is something that's constantly left out of this whole discussion. You see people saying that she's a female, or like how are you keeping this woman out of women's sports? Well, I mean, that's actually debatable and depends on what you mean by woman and female in these cases. It's people need to acknowledge the fact that women's sports, if we want women to be able to compete, we want females and girls to be able to compete and win, we need to have restrictions on who counts as a female. So we have women's sports, which is essentially a restricted class, and then we have quote unquote male sports, but those actually aren't male sports. They're open leagues. Most of male events aren't. You don't have to prove that you have a Y chromosome. They're open to everybody. So no one is saying that Semenya is unable to compete in a certain sport. All they're saying is they can't compete according to these rules, a restricted rule to keep female sports competitive. And people go back to that univariate fallacy I mentioned earlier and say but there's no single trait that's going to define it. Well, we have to draw a line somewhere. At some point, a line has to be drawn. Otherwise, bye women's sports. If you don't have any line, then you can just have males join. And I think the rules that they have are about as reasonable as you can get, which is shocking given how crazy everything is. That you can come up with rules that are this good, where if you're XX, so if you're genetically female and you just happen to have high testosterone, if you have polycystic ovary syndrome or something, you're still allowed to compete without taking hormone blockers or anything like that. But if you're genetically male and you have testosterone above a certain height, well, you can still compete if you have this disorder of differences of sexual development, so long as you bring your testosterone down. So no one's forcing Semenya to lower her testosterone. She can compete in the open category if she'd like to, and it's unfortunate, and there's nothing she did that was wrong, and people have nothing but compassion for her, and people do, but we can't let compassion for a certain single individual ruin an entire category and the competitiveness of an entire restricted league for girls and women. So so that's the full details on her case.
This whole ideology of sameness between the sexes, I mean, it's gone to ridiculous extremes where, I mean, first of all, why do we have men's and women's sports? I mean, it's separated. And so, just as an example, some clever budgie, and I'm using that term very sarcastically, in Spain decided to have boys and girls high school basketball mingle. We have boys teams against girls teams. Oh man, and the girls teams on average lost by 50 points.
Wow.
Yeah, I heard about that, and I heard that they made it in. I haven't verified this, but I heard that this rule was put into in the beginning of the season, and so there's it's kind of grandfathered and locked in right now. So they have to continue. They have to continue the whole year with this rule, where they have to the women are going to be competing against the boys and everything.
It's crazy that this is of course right at the point where boys are becoming men physically, and just you could probably do that with 6 or 7 year olds and not have.
I mean, you get most sports leagues are not sex segregated, until 11, 12, 13, when people are starting to go through puberty. That's only after that is usually when you have the sex segregation.
But
sports.
That word testosterone. It's kind of a big thing. I mean, it's massive. You can't ignore this.
Yeah. I mean, did you see the recent New York Times piece on the myth of?
Yeah, we're gonna go. Let's go to that New York Times piece because it was. This is the myth of testosterone. The myth of testosterone. Bit written by Katrina Karkazis and Rebecca Jordan-Young. This is. I forgot to put it to testosterone thing. Okay. It is not the male sex hormone, nor is it the key to athletic performance. Doesn't it kind of depend on which sport?
Yeah, and
it's
also
kind of critical in weightlifting, right?
And you can see him setting up the univariate fallacy right there in the title too, where they're trying to say, testosterone isn't something that all males have and females don't. But no one is saying that. I mean, it's all about testosterone levels, and we need to acknowledge that male levels of testosterone are, an order of magnitude or more higher than females. I mean, I think the average female is like something between like 0.6 and like 1.5 nanomoles per liter. In males is something like, I want to say 30 to 60 or something like that. So it's a huge difference.
Huge difference.
And there's no one out there saying that, if you have testosterone in your blood, that makes you male. And throughout this piece, they basically make this argument that even I think later in the document they even go full univariate fallacy and say something like,
I'll read it actually.
Okay, yeah, go for it.
Yeah, labeling testosterone the male sex hormone suggests that it is restricted to men and is alien to women's bodies and obfuscates the fact that women also produce and require testosterone as part of healthy functioning. Even the earliest hormone researchers understood that testosterone has wide-ranging effects on metabolism, liver function, bones, muscles, skin, and the brain in both sexes. Yeah, true, but they're missing the Paracelsus's dictum that the dose makes the poison. It's a massive difference.
Yeah, and even if you look among elite athletes, and it might be difficult to draw, a perfect parallel between how high their testosterone is and their performance. But the point is that testosterone, while it might be hard to draw a single line of, you have higher testosterone, that means you're this much faster or this much, stronger. But the idea is that testosterone has multiple effects. It affects everything simultaneously. So if you have an individual before they go through puberty, if you have a male, so before they go through puberty, if you were to just put them on, hormone blockers and never let them go through puberty, well, they would be shorter, they would be weaker, they would be slower for sure. We know they're going to be shorter. If you allow them to go through puberty, that person is 100% going to be taller if you allow them to develop, and it's going to affect so many aspects of their biology. The development of their brain, how strong they are, how big their bones become, the tendon strength, and so it's just this. Yes, it has multiple effects. So you can't maybe draw a direct line from any one trait to athletic ability, but you can't do it for one. You can do it for all of them simultaneously, and it matters, especially when one group, males, has such a higher level, and they're reaping all these benefits of that.
Yeah, they bring up a study from 2004, saying that, testosterone doesn't guarantee athletic performance because cyclists have less testosterone. But they also have men have higher hemoglobin concentrations in blood. Yeah. And it might make a difference too.
Saying that, yeah.
It's important for things like weightlifting, anything in the strength sports. No question. But cyclists don't benefit necessarily from large muscles at all. I mean, it's actually a detriment because of weight and transport of oxygen, that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, there's a reason why testosterone is a banned substance in every professional sports league around the world, and there's a reason bodybuilders specifically decide to use it because of its effects on protein synthesis, muscle recovery, and just the amount of muscle mass you're able to carry on your body at any given moment. When you look at why do trans men get stronger when they transition from female to male when they're just taking testosterone, the effects are dramatic. And why do trans women get weaker when they start going on hormone blockers? Like there's no organization in the world right now that's accepting trans women without this requirement of lowering testosterone. Now, I don't think lowering testosterone it's not going to remove all the benefits of having gone through male puberty and stuff, but it certainly does make them weaker. What the only variable we're changing here is that we're lowering their testosterone. So how do you explain that? And how do you explain the fact that just at the time when little boys and girls are starting to go through puberty is when the males start running faster than the girls, start getting taller than the girls? It's crazy. Testosterone matters so much for so many different things, and no one's making this claim that testosterone is only found in males and females. It's just a straw man combined with the univariate fallacy. So just pick your fallacy basically and publish it in the New York Times and in Nature.
Yeah, no kidding. It's New York Times, and yeah, Nature published that little bit on the myth of the gendered brain. Oh.
Yeah, if these things were like coming out of BuzzFeed and stuff like that, that'd still be bad. If they're coming out of Red State or really really crazy news, that wouldn't matter. But we're talking Nature, which is the most prestigious scientific journal in the world, and the New York Times, which is probably the most widely read magazine in the world. So their reach is extremely far, and they're extremely influential, and they're just publishing complete pseudoscience.
How do such people who do spout this reconcile their views with reality? This is what I don't understand. I mean, you can actually see this. I mean, look at Castor Semenya. You've got to be kidding me.
Can I interject?
Sure, go ahead.
This might help explain it. Somebody who I deeply respect left this conversation and said we're trans haters for having this discussion.
Yay!
And, I mean, this is a programmer who is scientifically literate, and I'm stunned, because I don't think any of us are trans haters. I mean, that's crazy.
Huh? Interesting.
So, Colin, how do you address those types of accusations, if you get them? I presume you get.
Yeah, you said the word trans feeder. Is that what you said? Or
trans hater.
Trans hater. Oh yeah, no, I get it all the time. And I mean, it's just something you need to address. You need to stick completely to the facts of the matter, and I'm not gonna ever just there's of course the reason that I hate the most when I talk about trans issues is I try to do it just in the most here are the facts, here we know, and being compassionate as much as I can. But the thing that I hate the most, I posted that one story about that trans woman who broke 4 world records or whatever and went 9 for 9 on her events. Mm-hmm. And it's important to get that message out that look how absurd this is. Look, we're all in clown world now. This is insane. That needs to be front and center in everyone's mind about how insane this really is. But then look at the comments that I get on that, because Joe Rogan retweeted it, and so he's got a lot of dude bro fans. They're just making, they're just saying things just that's an ugly bitch, or they're just just making really really mean remarks, just at the trans person, and so all these people come out that are that wouldn't have come out if I didn't tweet this out. But as long as we just need to make sure that we stay on topic, and that we're not perpetuating any sort of negative stereotypes, because I'm the first person to say that I have nothing but compassion for trans individuals. I'm so glad I don't know what it's like to feel like I was born in the wrong body and feel like I want to get out of it and change it. There should be nothing but compassion for them. But compassion doesn't need to come necessarily with just buying into them or feeding into their delusions about what they really are. And what they are is whatever sex they were born with, and they'll never be able to change that. And it's going to hurt for them to hear that, but what are we going to do? Just buy into their idea about themselves? Just tell them that they're the thing that they're not, and then go and make laws that are going to cater to this delusion that they have about themselves? There needs to be an adult in the room saying, we can socially accept you as the sex that you identify as, and we'll do our best to use the pronouns you want to, And I have no problem if a trans woman, like I'll refer to them as she, and I'll treat them like I treat anyone else. So but we can't just. It's a social thing. It's a social acceptance, but it can't be coded into law. And this is what they're trying to do. And at this point is where we need to just draw a line in the sand and say, sorry, we can't bend reality for you. Like reality needs to be. That's the bedrock. And we accept you on a social level, but I'm sorry, you've gone through male puberty, you cannot compete in the women's league. I'm sorry, you can compete in the open league, so when no one's saying you can't compete, you just can't compete as a woman, because your identity doesn't dictate anything about your actual biology, except for subjective brain states that you happen to have.
I wonder how prevalent this ideology, and that's what it is, it's ideology, it's not evidence-based positions. How entrenched is it in the, I don't know the answer to this, how entrenched is it in various communities, including the trans community? Because obviously not all of them agree.
Yeah, I suspect it's not. Well, it's not all, and I don't even know if it's most. It's hard to tell because they're a loud group, and so what we experience on places like Twitter, it is probably way overrepresented. It has to be overrepresented because I think the volume is louder than the proportion of individuals that are actually holding these views. I know several trans women who are just. They're kind of like the Jen Smiths of the world, where they realize that, what they have is they have dysphoria. They want to do ways to bring their bodies more in line with the way that, an expression that they're most comfortable with. But they realize that, there are certain attributes that they don't share with biological women. Like haven't been socialized as a girl growing up. They haven't had to been ashamed of their periods or anything like that. So they haven't been treated like women in many ways. So there's just a lot of there are differences in the experiences between biological women who've been raised as women and trans women who have essentially been raised as men their whole lives and then are just trying to join the party late, who can't comment on things like abortion or things like menstruation or anything, and even categories like incidences of rape or things like that, that are sensitive, that women deserve to have their own places to be able to feel comfortable and talk to them about these subjects without male-bodied individuals essentially asserting themselves in these situations. So, I do see a lot of, I say a lot, but it's hard to, I don't know what proportion that is of the community. If I had to guess, it's not, it can't be most. I refuse to believe that. I think most have to be pretty reasonable or just non-political, but it's definitely a problem because it's the loud ones that are. Oh, I get that almost every day.
Trans exclusionary radical feminist, and my response was, "I'm not radical."
Yeah, and that also. Yeah, and the thing is, people get called, trans exclusionary radical feminists, but it's. The main thing that people are trying to exclude, I guess the main trait that people want to exclude isn't the fact that you're trans. Like when we're talking about trans women playing in female sports, and they say, well, you're discriminating against trans people. It's like no. Like we're not saying you can't join because you're trans. We're saying you can't join because you're male. Like a trans woman can't play against the female league for the exact same reason that I shouldn't be able to play in the trans women league. Like it's not sexist to tell me that I can't play, against females any more than it's transphobic to say that a trans woman can't play against females. It's just it's a sex division. It has nothing to do with you being trans. Like that's not the trait of interest that we're talking about.
But you know the story of Hannah Mancy?
Oh no.
No, Hannah Mancy.
And I might have, maybe I'm bad with names, so. Maybe.
She played Australian football, which is I like watching on TV. But she played in women's professional Australian football, and broke somebody's leg because she is about twice the size of anybody else who plays that game. And that's wrong. I'm sorry, it's just wrong. She
Yeah.
has
we're
massive
just
advantage.
we're just being asked to observe this absurdity and just act like nothing is wrong here, nothing to see here.
Yeah, and I just find it
It's
crazy.
it's the biggest form of gaslighting that I could even imagine happening. We're telling people to just
I
you're
never thought
being
about it
deceived.
that way.
Oh yeah, I mean we're saying like don't trust your eyes. Like there's no difference between this individual who's breaking women's legs, who just so happened to be trans. Like so
There's an interesting number in that you can calculate, which is the ratio of performance between women and men. And there's an interesting number that, if you look at the numbers here, let me bump that up for you. The ratio comes out to about 0.89, 0.90. And this is from, you go from 100 meters to the marathon. That number is essentially the same. I recalculated it for the marathon. It's actually lower than that. It's 0.89. And this isn't just track and field. You can go to weightlifting. You can go to kayaking and rowing. This number it keeps coming up, and it's got a very small deviation of about 0.02.
Oh yeah,
and it's everywhere, as long as you can measure it. I mean, like fencing, well, you can't really do that, but it hasn't changed in over half a century. So people say that women are catching up to men. They just aren't. It's not happening, and there's good reason to say they aren't going to.
Yeah, I mean, if you compare it before, like women never got into sports, when they just first got access, they weren't as impressive as they are now. There's a historical lag, but to act like because the women's times have gone, the gap has closed a little, to say that with more time the gap's going to close completely is completely nonsense. What we're seeing right now is this point of diminishing returns, where like before women were at a disadvantage, and now that competition, women have been able to play sports for a long time. They're beginning to asymptote. They're beginning to realize their full potential, but still that final asymptote, the limit that they have, is still right around 10% under
at the youth level,
what men can do. So it's not still increasing. It's going to be, if it increases anymore, it's going to be increasing at a decreasing rate.
Yeah. Totally diminishing returns. Now, we were talking about Caster Semenya. She's an Olympic champion. I assume the world record holder right now for the women's 800 meters. And it's been very controversial for years, her participation, because she has elevated testosterone. We talked a little bit about that. And the decision's really, I think you came up with a good solution, that if she wants to compete, she can compete in an open category. And she can compete if she lowers her testosterone below 5 nanomoles per liter. She'd be allowed to compete because she's considered the XY DSD, a intersex condition, and so she's able to compete in both categories, but she would have to take some sort of blocker. She was for a while. Then there was a reversal of the decision by a court. And interesting fact too. Those few years where she did lower her testosterone, her 800 meter run times went up by about 5 to 7 seconds for those years, and then went back down again to where they were before. So, does testosterone matter? Well, then 5 to 7 seconds for an 800 meter is pretty large.
Yeah,
it's the denial just amazes me. There's this just and we get people that are, I wouldn't, some are scientists, some are historians of science, or sociologists, or they're on the edges of science, that are participating in this and actually inflaming things. And then of course we have our Minister of Science, right? So,
it's hard for just your general person in the population to evaluate some of these claims they're making, because you have people who are sometimes scientists themselves publishing articles in the most prestigious scientific journal in the world, Nature, making fallacies that are hard to detect. Like it's hard to detect sometimes the univariate fallacy unless you know about univariate and multivariate statistics and analyses and like what that means and what a principal component analysis is. And these aren't things that most people have ever even heard of in their lives. And so you get these scientists publishing papers in prestigious journals making mirrors the whole thing. And so what I'm trying to do is highlight a lot of these fallacies that you're...
Why are we not hearing more about female to male transgender or from them? Especially those who are engaging in sports. And second, we frame this around sports, but what implications does this have? Is there contributions in general as well as that too?
Yeah. So for the voices type thing, why aren't so many like standing up and being activists? I guess I don't know, but I have heard people say that females, if we look at like human personality differences, on average, females score higher in traits like agreeableness. They're probably just less aggressive and confrontational on average. Man, there's 10 trans women, so their numbers are lower, and also a lot of trans men are probably less inclined to want to compete because they know that they're at an advantage. Because when they start taking testosterone, since they've already basically matured as a female, like they're not going to get taller, they're not going to go through male puberty that's going to change their bodies in a complete way. I mean, you'll see a lot of differences, but they're going to be at a disadvantage compared to a biological male that's going through. And so that's I think some of that can explain for why you don't see trans men in sports, and probably why they're not speaking up to the same degree, although I'm not 100% sure on that. And then you asked a question about what the hormones do to their bodies. Is that what you said? Can you repeat?
No, what are the health implications for transgendered people, male or female?
Of just taking cross-sex hormones?
Well, I guess. I mean, I would think there would be medical import where if you're designated as a particular sex and you become another gender, that if you deny your sex, you could end up in, some kind of medical trouble, right?
Oh, yeah, I see what you're saying. Yeah, potentially. I mean, there's certain types of mental conditions that express themselves differently.
Even heart attacks.
Yeah, exactly. Right? Heart attacks, like men, they feel there's just different sort of diagnostic things to look out for that are the signs of, if you're going to have a heart attack, which is useful to know. And so this is, exactly. There's a lot of medical reasons why the doctor needs to know your sex and not how you identify, because how you identify has nothing to do with how they should medically approach you.
Yeah, even breast cancer. I realize that men get breast cancer too, but I don't know what the ratio is, but I suppose if you're okay, yeah.
And if you go into a clinic and you have, if your stomach is cramping, it's important to know if you're a female. Maybe you need to, have a pregnancy test. Where if you're saying that you're a male, then then there's no reason why you should have something like that. But but I've even been seeing people. I don't know if you've seen Ellis Cashmore on Twitter. I think I want to say they're British, but they're sociologists, and they're the ones who are making these claims and saying that men can have babies too. Men can get pregnant just as easily as women can. But they're responding to someone who's saying that, who's using male-female terms, and then Ellis Cashmore is, no, men can have babies too. Well, we didn't say men, we said males.
Yeah.
That flip.
Yeah. Terminology.
The difference between sex and gender. I think it's important. I don't understand why it's been so conflated, because, I have nothing...
I think it's on purpose. I think it's actually...
Well, I suppose it is, but even me being, from the background of social sciences and humanities, that was a thing. You distinguish between gender and sex, right?
Yeah.
Because, and just as you would distinguish between your identity as opposed to your orientation, right? These are different categories, and there's a multiplicity because there's social categories, right? Whereas, something like I said, something like a heart attack diagnosis is something that doesn't have so much fluidity.
Yeah, and there's also, I think,
try to bridge those two. I appreciate that. Let's try to bring two fields together, but sometimes it just doesn't work. Obviously.
Yeah, there's also a big issue with how the word gender is being used, especially in like social media, and I think this is actually maybe responsible for most of the confusion that you see when people start talking about gender online. And that's because there's a lot of different groups that are using this word in mutually exclusive ways that aren't compatible with one another. So there's, if I can remember, I think there's maybe about 5 different ways that the word gender is being used. So if you get like people on the right, like your Ben Shapiro's or whatever, they just equate gender and sex. In their mind, this is the same thing. You'll see Ben Shapiro just interchangeably use these things. So you have that, which is this, sex and gender are the
denial
same.
of this, the distinction, right?
Yeah,
which is very problematic in and of itself.
But he's an
right?
ideologue, right? He's.
Well, yeah, but still, there's.
Yeah.
Go ahead. So, I'm sorry.
Yeah, and then you have like the radical feminist side, where their definition is, adult human female, which takes into account, the socialization, whatever the women go through girlhood up until adulthood, and they also have this sort of exogenous factors of society, sort of like having stereotypes about males and females that sort of whip individuals back into their roles when they deviate from these stereotypes. And that's what they say when like gender is a social construct, like it's society that's basically enforcing these stereotypes on individuals who deviate.
Yeah,
so that's
that's an interesting thought. That's an interesting philosophical argument.
It's very interesting. I actually quite like it and think it explains quite a bit in some situations.
Exactly. Yeah.
But, and then you have other people who will. Sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, if you look at the language where they say, well, your sex is assigned at birth. I mean, it's as if it was a coin flip, or the doctor felt like, I feel like this kid's going to be a male today. No, I mean it's not assigned. It's determined by actually observing the primary sexual characteristics of the infant.
Okay, so may I interject? May I interject with another? Okay, so. My understanding, and I'm completely ignorant of this, but when a child was not, determined to be one or the other, they would basically, the first time the child urinated, that's what they would kind of go with, right?
What?
So, yeah.
When? Where's this?
I don't know. I think that was just sort of common practice from what I understand, but I would, and of course,
I'm
people.
not sure about that.
People whose, physicians or whatever made the wrong choices were quite upset about this, obviously, right? Because they had been literally assigned at birth based on where their pee came from, right?
So if the kid was
up,
it was a male.
So I'm wondering if, Colin, if you know how they treat that now, because it seemed to me that was an issue. Like, I don't know.
Yeah. So I haven't heard about like where they peed, but I have heard that there's been a lot of cases of what they call like intersex, genital mutilation type thing, where they sex assignment surgery when they're born. They'll have, if their genitals are sort of intermediate. In the past, we'd have doctors that would just sort of perform a surgery to kind of sort of bring their genitals in line what they thought they were. But sometimes they gave them the genitals that was in conflict with their biology, basically. And so that's I don't think they do that anywhere anymore.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
Yeah, so it's basically.
I would certainly hope not.
Yeah, I hope not. Yeah, it's a big issue. So this, if they want to have this surgery later in their lives, they're more than welcome to. But yeah,
I think we recognize that essentially as child abuse now. I would hope.
Yeah. But this idea that like the doctor, by their mere utterances, they're some kind of like wizard, just by incantation, they're creating the sex of the individual. Where if let's say if the doctor, when I was born, if they had just proclaimed it's a girl, they're acting like that I would be somehow walking through my life just like really confused right now and wonder why people are interacting with me certain ways. Like, no, at some point, no matter what the doctor says in the room the moment I'm born, like, I'm going to understand they were wrong at some point. No matter what, like, no one's, I haven't even seen my birth certificate. Like, my mom has it just somewhere in the barn at her house somewhere. It's like it could say female on it, like, but that doesn't matter because I'm female, so it has no effect on me whatsoever. So it's really silly.
Is who you are, right? It's not just a word; it's the reality.
Yeah.
I'm just thinking about the irony of the criticism that gender is assigned at birth when you distinguish between a penis and a vagina, and yet when it's ambiguous, they literally are we're assigning a gender. Literally.
Yeah, back then.
So, and that's wrong too.
Don't think they do that now. If it's ambiguous physiologically, I think then they probably put that on the.
Yeah.
Because that matters, right?
If we're going by like the trans ideology of what gender is, where to them it's
social
just like
construct.
Yeah. For the trans people, it's your self identity. So your gender is how you feel on the inside in relation to your body. So even according to like their own definition of what gender is, when they say that they were assigned, their gender at birth, like, well, the doctor is not assigning your brain state to you. They're not assigning how you identify. I assume as an infant, you don't identify as anything.
Yeah.
You don't have a conception of yourself in any way. So, the doctor's not saying how you will identify. They're clearly identifying your biological sex. So we need to move that conversation on from identifying something at birth to, gender at birth to, they're
declaring a sex versus declaring a gender. Yes. They're not declaring a gender. They're declaring a biological fact, and hopefully, if that fact is outside of for those cases that are, respect that, and then again, I suppose that would come with its own whole host of issues too, right? But hopefully, there's enough intelligence out there to, respect the fluidity of sex and gender.
Absolutely.
If that makes sense.
Everyone should be able to.
I'm not conflating the two, but you see where I'm going. Yeah.
Yeah. Everyone should be able to express themselves any way that they wish to.
Everybody should be free to do that.
No matter about their sex. I mean, I've even said before that this modern denial of sex that you get in the trans community by they'll point to intersex individuals as an example of why the categories don't even exist. But this is a self-refuting. It's a self-refuting argument because the whole concept of trans itself makes absolutely no sense unless there's something objectively real to you to be trans in relation to.
Yeah, something that identifies you with a particular gender.
Yeah. So what do you mean? What do you mean that you're a trans woman? Unless that means that you're a biological male who identifies with the stereotypes or with a different sex, of the opposite sex.
Mm-hmm.
If you're saying that sex doesn't exist, then what does it even mean to be trans? It loses all meaning if there's nothing objective that your mind is going to then maybe vary in relation to.
Yeah.
Damn your reason.
Well, and that must vary from culture to culture too, right?
What was that? Sorry.
That would vary from culture to culture.
What would? Sorry.
Gender identity would vary from culture to culture, and its uptake and its acceptance and blah blah blah, right?
Yeah.
So for example, I think it's in Saudi Arabia. If you dare, make the mild suggestion that you're gay, they will force you to. Yeah. They'll force you to do that surgery.
Yeah, and then there's these people who actually were saying, "Oh, look at that! They're actually
how
gender reassignment." I'm just like, no, they're not. That's not what they're doing.
Yeah. It's not motivated by compassion for trans people. It's motivated by complete homophobia.
Yeah,
in fact, their family would rather accept the fact that their son is a female living in a male body, and then change that rather than my son is homosexual.
Yeah.
Which in those areas of the world is a big offense. They can.
I'm sorry. My friend checked out on us earlier because I think he would appreciate this discussion.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Everything's mad.
I don't really care. It's if I lose friends over this, well, you know what? They weren't really friends to begin with. So.
Yeah, I mean, I've lost a few friends since I've started being public about all of this because for a long time, like when I was an undergrad, and then I decided to go the path to go to grad school. And, you get a lot of professors who are friending you on Facebook, and then so there's more and more people that are seeing my views. Like when I was a lot younger, I was sort of like the angry atheist person. I didn't care what I was posting on social media, but then I slowly started self-censoring because I realized that, people with other views, I don't want to ruin socially any opportunities I might be able to get from it. And it's hard to even know. Well, I just looked back one day, and this was right, I'm a postdoc now at Penn State, and I looked back and I just realized how much self-censoring I'm doing. Like my Facebook is completely just locked down. I never tweet anything. I didn't tweet anything that could be mildly critical of anything, but now I was just going through so much internal struggle with I was pulling my hair out over this stuff because I used to be so outspoken, but I didn't want to ruin my ability to get a faculty position because they're so competitive.
Isn't that sad?
Academia has there's a lot of woke people in there at the high end, and it only takes one person on a hiring committee to just sink my entire application. And so it was a big decision I had to make. And then I'd look forward even more too. I'd say like, okay, if I self-censor until I get a faculty job, well then I need to get tenure. It's 6 years of assistant professor before I get tenure, and so I'm going to have to self-censor for 6 more years.
And even then, did not Brett Weinstein and I'm sorry, I can't remember. They had tenure, didn't they? So that doesn't necessarily protect you anymore either.
Exactly. I spoke to some of my colleagues. They told me that tenure can't even help you, and so then I'm looking just at the long game, and I'm saying well, I'm never going to be able to self-censor.
Yeah. Okay. Might as well just.
Yeah, and I would just realize that I would rather live a life where I'm not as successful, and I can speak my mind on issues that I think are really important than I would just to leave, this zipper-lipped academic life.
It takes guts with
it does.
Your place in the career.
How many people do you represent that aren't speaking out, right?
Oh, I got so many emails.
Yeah.
When with the Colette article. And a lot. My main advisor, he told me to publish it, anonymously, and then one of my other mentors, they even said don't even publish it anonymously because someone will find out who you are. But I would say actually the reception has been pretty good. It's opened up a lot of different doors and networks for me.
That's good. Yeah. There's some group here in Canada pertaining to the social sciences that was trying to put together a petition calling out people in the social sciences who were I think
that was a Twitter thing. That was a Twitter thing. I don't know how serious
crazy.
They were, but even just suggesting it is a big thing. I mean,
it's a what do I want to say? It's not a witch hunt in the sense of violence, but it's like a verbal witch hunt somehow. You don't dare not say the
it's
thing
the
that
mob.
You dare not dissent.
It's the modern pitchfork and torches carrying version of the mob in Transylvania. It's no different.
Yeah, so I'm hoping it's not going to have a huge effect. But I mean, there's that one. I never. It's you never know how many callbacks you're not getting. For a job.
Yeah, you don't.
So I've had an interview. I didn't get it, but I did have an interview. And so, at least some departments don't care, or they would if they knew, and they just don't know. I just don't know. It's a big guessing game. Maybe I could just be freaking out too much about it, or I don't know.
How dare they actually?
No, I think it's a very brave act. I think it's a very brave act, like Randy. But
I mean, I did it for my own sanity at the end of the day. And it's been a lot. It was a huge weight off my chest as soon as I just got it out there. I'm on record doing this, and now I tweet all the time, and I don't care.
Yeah. Well, good for you.
They can follow you on Twitter. Your handle is at Colin Wright.
It's at
Swipe Right. Swipe Right.
Yeah.
That's right.
WRIGHT for the last.
Yeah. So I strongly suggest I was one of the people to follow. Yayo is another one I like. Real Yayo. He's always interesting. And as ever, the folks at New Peer Review, those guys are people. I don't know if they're guys. I don't know who they are.
Yes, that's pretty cool too.
They're really good tracking down the absurd stuff that gets published in some of these fields, and in their own field, they're actually sociologist himself, I believe.
Oh, are they? I don't even know who they are.
Yeah, they keep it really quiet.
Well, then there's Peter Boghossian and
yeah. And he's
I'm sorry, I can't remember the. Sorry.
Helen Pluckrose and James Lindsay.
Yes, thank you. Yeah.
They're fantastic. I think they're closest.
Fascinating.
They're on the ball like big time. I think more people need to follow James Lindsay and Helen Pluckrose and Peter Boghossian, but especially the first two. They're the more active ones on Twitter, and I think they are closest to understanding the whole picture than just about anybody I see online right now.
They sure know how to write the papers, right? They know how to walk the walk, and it's...
Exactly.
Well, is not Helen a feminist scholar? I think she is, isn't she?
I think she is, yeah. In
the classic term of what feminism used to mean.
Yes.
Well, in terms of, like feminism is I often have to bring this up, and people get upset because they want to go with the dictionary definition of feminism, but in fact it's an academic conversation. And feminists profoundly disagree with one another on very important issues. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I mean, of course, I think the end goal is equality for women, but just like democracy, there's Democrats, there's Republicans, there's liberal and conservative, blah blah blah. Marxists. They're both interested in democracy, but it's how it's realized that they're arguing about, right? There's a common goal, but there's many, and I was talking to somebody about there's a strand of feminism that think that women should be barefoot and pregnant and home, in the kitchen.
They're called Republicans.
Because I know, but they say those women are happier, right? And I'm like, I don't buy it, but still they're contributing to the argument. And then I have a friend of mine, had said essentially the same thing in different words. We should be sitting on our asses, fucking the fittest and the finest, because we're the, right? Like biological, we get to, babysitting each other's kid. Like it's the same argument presented from two entirely different frameworks, right? And both purport to, advance the happiness of woman, I suppose. But that's a nuance. It's not a simple,
there's a lot of different brands, right?
Yeah.
It's hard to believe too that the people, the hardcore, far left feminism we have now, I would have never thought in a million years that it would be that group that would be essentially the biggest threat to female sports. It's them who want to get rid of the categories, and nothing seems more anti-feminist to me than just this idea that we can eliminate the categories and let's just have one big open competition. Then we'll never see any women's sports, or they'll never receive any scholarship ever again. Like, how can they possibly think this is in the interests of women?
That's a good point too. Yeah.
Well, we're the same. That's this thing. They need equality to mean sameness, and that's just not right. It doesn't work that way. It doesn't mean that you're not treated equally under the law, that you're not given the same opportunities. It's this fear that we'll go back to this, if we're not 50-50 in everything, that we'll go back 100 years and codify female behavior again, which was, to me, that was the real problem. It wasn't. It was this codification of two separate behaviors. Women become nurses, men become doctors, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
The stereotypes, yeah.
And ignoring population statistics, because they overlap, and to varying degrees. There's no real difference in intelligence, and there might be a difference in the variance, which means you get more male geniuses, but you also get more male dunces. We all know the male dunces, but real dumb.
I see them all the time. Twitter every day.
Well, in popular culture, like Simpsons, right down to what was that one? I'll send you to the moon, or I don't know. It's before my time,
bang,
but
zoom.
you were talking about Lucille Ball or whatever, that kind of stuff.
That was the Honeymooners.
Okay, whatever. Well, yeah, but then Lucille Ball show too also had
just make a
smacking women around. I did. I mean, I did study this. I'm just not current on.
You heard it here, for folks. The first time you didn't quite get it right, but Yeah, okay.
I probably read it in a textbook.
Okay. Yeah, I think we should wind down now. Anything else you want to
ask? No. Is there anything else you want to talk about, Colin?
Yeah. Anything you're promoting? Doing? Start a
I'm
podcast.
not this conversation, but
I have nothing to promote at the moment. I'm just about to start my field season and get some research done, basically. I wish I could tweet all day, but sadly I gotta work.
yeah.
Yeah. No, I think we covered a lot of ground here. That was fun.
Yeah, it was good.
Thank you. Yeah, it was great to have you. Yeah.
I think we should have you on again to talk about the usual stuff. Do our Pope
about the what stuff?
The usual stuff. This strange things. Sometimes it's this kind of thing. Sometimes it's religious nonsense, etc. Especially when it pertains to Canada. It's we're not immune. Yeah. We don't have Trump, but we.
Yeah, I came from the old school New Atheist tradition. It's kind of weird to say old school New Atheist, but
yeah.
No, those are something. That's a subject that I never get a chance to talk about.
You know what?
Yeah,
that's exactly what I was going to ask you to expand upon if you have time. And Randy, if you're okay with it.
Oh, we could do another.
Can you tell us more about that?
Okay.
Do you want to do it now?
Sure. What do you want to know?
So did you leave a religion, or were you raised in a non-religious household? Like, what's your story to,
I was raised in a non-religious household, but in a household that we just never talked about religion. Like we didn't go to church, but we never talked about atheism or anything like that. So it was just, it was just a non-religious upbringing. And it wasn't until my late teens, maybe when I was 20 or so, when I first read The God Delusion, and I was reading, I think it was a Times article that had Richard Dawkins having a conversation with, who was it? Francis Collins, the creationist guy who's at the, I don't know, is he still the head of the NIH, or at least he was. He was the head of the Human Genome Project. But it was just like this argument about science and religion, and that's what really got me into it. And then I read The God Delusion after I read that Time article. And then Dawkins is an evolutionary biologist. He actually studies animal behavior, and that's exactly what I do. Obviously, I went down his path because I would say he was my intellectual hero early on. And then I kind of got into evolution by reading both Dawkins and then other people like Stephen Gould and then Daniel Dennett, and then I got into the whole new atheist thing, and so it just spread out from there. And then I had my angry atheist early days, and then I mellowed out a little bit more, and so that's where I came from, basically.
Yeah. So did you always kind of take for granted that you were just an atheist? And like that's kind of my background. It never seemed odd to me to just say I'm an atheist. I don't believe in God or whatever. The terminology was appropriate for the context, right?
Yeah, so, I never believed in it. I remember I would talk to friends every once in a while who were religious, and I remember they would just make these arguments, and I didn't have the toolkit to know why they were wrong. I just knew that,
I suppose so.
Fishy, didn't know the logical fallacies.
They'd be like, well, you can't prove God doesn't exist, and at the time it's like, I guess I can't. Like, wait, does that mean, well, that doesn't mean it's 50-50, it doesn't mean it's a coin flip. And so that I just knew that, something was up, and then, I would actually say a lot of part of me getting into evolutionary biology, and the reason I'm an evolutionary biologist today is because of Richard Dawkins and because of the philosophical implications that evolution has, both on debunking things like creationism and special creation in a young Earth and all that stuff. That was pretty much the impetus that sparked my interest in it. Not just relating to God, but then questions about who we are as a species and our place in the universe, and we're evolved and we have all these evolved ways that we behave, and it's just trying to take a step back and try to observe human behavior in the context of evolution and our place in the animal kingdom. And so that was a big reason why I got into my field in the first place, for sure. And I was really kind of against creationism getting taught in schools, anti-intelligent design. I was arguing against that stuff, and then that kind of fell out of
That's kind of
it's there.
I'm still trying to finish up my dissertation on that, and I'm just like, I've run out of steam. I've seen so many changes in the academic context that I'm just like, oh my goodness, I don't want to. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So yeah.
It was
Finish the damn PhD.
Yeah, or drop. Like I'm seriously thinking.
Get it out of the way. You put
Or
this
just
much
move on with
investment
life.
into it.
That's true. Yeah.
But sort of as this threat to evolution went away, like intelligent design, like they're not even in the conversation anymore. Like I don't even hear them doing anything. I know that
they're kind of
I know Stephen Myers has like a new book on intelligent design or something, but like it's not what it used to be. But then somehow, just like beneath everyone's radar, like this new anti-evolution, that's what my Quillette piece was on, basically, is this new left-wing evolution denialism has just like crept up, and now they're saying that, there's no evolved differences in both the bodies and the behaviors of humans, and, or it's evolution from the neck down, we didn't evolve. Evolutionary psychology.
Yes, evolutionary psychology. Gad Saad is the one who really speaks out on that one, and I mean it's fascinating. These are pretty bloody robust arguments, and marketing research is extremely, quantitative, generally speaking, right? So it's not they're not pulling these things out of their ass by any means. So that's a well-established field.
Marketing has, by trial and error. I mean, it's very evolutionary in a way. It's very trial and error.
Yeah.
Figured out how to market a bit based on your sex, and
we've always known that sex sells, don't we?
Well, that's the act. I'm talking about the what you're assigned at birth.
There's just certain things about advertising that, I mean, again, this is probably specifically cultural to North Americans, but there's formulas essentially for doing ads.
Yeah. And
they work.
It would be remarkable if we were the only social mammalian species that didn't have sexual dimorphic behaviors.
Yeah.
Especially because we are dimorphic in just our anatomy. We know that.
No, we're not. No. Totally didn't deny that. Just amazes me. Right,
and I'll reveal my internalized misogyny. Like, yes, I want to be treated equal in relationships, but then again, there's okay, if I want to have an equal relationship, no, but there are certain relationships where I want to be treated like a goddamn goddess, right? And vice versa. Like, there are privileged relationships in my life. Obviously, my mom and my dad and my daughter are, I'm going to privilege them above everybody else, right? That's just how it is. So I don't think that we're all like in terms of like social, I guess, equality. Yes, but also, the reality is that we have bonds that are, based on kinship and that kind of thing, right?
Is that Hamilton's rule, or is that?
I don't know. I'm just full of shit, but.
No, you're describing something that's well known in evolutionary science. I'm trying to remember the.
Yeah.
Is it Hamilton or?
Which one you talking about, like the taking care of your...
Yeah, the kin...
Yeah, basically. That's Hamilton's rule. It's...
Yeah, Hamilton's rule.
You'll... Right. Yeah, so your relatedness is going to depend on, like, the amount of altruism you're willing to expend.
Yes.
Yeah.
For certain individuals.
Say there was a fire or something like that, and if there was a fire and I could get my daughter out and grab another kid or two along the way... Great, but I'm going to get my daughter out first, aren't I?
The cats come first.
Oh!
I think he had that quote where it's like he'd give his life for a brother or 8 cousins or something like that. If you do the math, you can look at how many genes you share with your cousins and how many brothers that would equal. And that's an extreme example, but
and that's not to say that we don't care about other people. It's just a biological fact that we, my mom and my dad and my daughter, they're my core, so of course I'm going to have a different relationship with them that isn't necessarily equal, but,
And that's an evolved trait that we have. I mean, exactly. That's evolutionary psychology right there.
Well, and we were talking about how sex sells, but also emotion like that sells, right?
Yeah,
definitely. PZ Myers denies evolutionary psychology.
I got into it with PZ on Twitter the other day. He was...
Oh, wow.
I did do once.
He's gone completely nuts. I used to be a big fan of his.
Same here.
Early in the day, actually, I was part of the Secular Student Alliance. I was the president of the club at my community college back in the day, and he actually came out to our event. We hosted him, and I had to pick him up from a train station, and we shared the car all the way back. And had a really great conversation, and he did really great. Went out to dinner. I had a whole day and night, hanging out with PZ Myers, and he was great.
Mm-hmm.
Now I don't even recognize him.
Then he showed his true colors when he showed how much of an ideologue he is.
Oh my goodness, I don't even recognize him. I mean, he'll be on Twitter and just be like, "Who are you? Someone? Are you possessed? Like, who is this individual?"
Yeah,
he's completely rabid. It's
a couple of months ago, I had a run-in with him on Facebook, and I brought up Dr. Deborah So, in terms of brain differences and behavior differences in sex, and he's like, "Oh, she's just somebody the conservatives trot out to buttress their bigotry," and I'm like, "Okay." And so he links to his little blurb on her, and I say,
Wow.
"Oh, okay." I go to Deborah So's article. There's about a dozen peer-reviewed citations.
Yeah.
His, nothing. So which one do you think I'm going to accept?
Yeah. I think my limit was when what's his name, Robin Williams committed suicide, and he posted something like, "Nobody's paying attention to." There was something. Oh, I'm so sorry, I can't remember. There was another really, really horrible tragedy going on at the same time.
Absolutely.
I'm sorry, there's always a tragedy going on, so I can't remember the particular one, but PC was like, everybody's paying. Yeah, everybody's, PC is going on, like, everybody's, upset about this white guy's death, blah, 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 and nobody's paying attention to that. Meanwhile, I'm thinking, holy fuck, have you not read your bloody paper today? Because it's everywhere. I'm Canadian. It was, it was right in my face the minute I woke up or whatever, right?
Yeah.
I thought that was so mean-spirited because it's not like nobody has called Robin Williams a sexist or anything like that. So just to pick this,
he was a
tragedy and try to, I don't know, compare it to another tragedy. Like, wow, that was so mean-spirited and awful. I thought it's I don't want to listen to you anymore.
And this idea that like tragedies that happen on the same day are in some sense in like this zero-sum conflict for attention. It's like, we can care about both of these things.
Yeah.
Like it doesn't diminish one to have another one at the same time. It's like, we can understand that there's two things going on that we can both be sad about. Like,
to understand that. No, it's
and how many things went unreported that day? How many murders? How many beheadings?
Exactly.
We think about the global context, right? The
reason is.
Have you seen PZ's? He has a recent. PZ Myers has a very recent video that he made, supposedly debunking evolutionary psychology. I watched the whole thing, and it was just like I had to pause every about 2 minutes when he just completely went nuts. He's a biologist, and yet he doesn't understand that when people are making claims. For instance, one of the biggest claims that people have in evolutionary psychology is that there had been some evolutionary psychologists who study very sensitive subjects, like the evolution of rape or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a sensitive subject for sure, but if you read the papers, it's not like justifying it.
Yeah.
It's
exactly.
just
it's more to solve the problem.
All it's saying is that like in the past, people who may have done that it has a non-zero effect on reproduction. That's all that is being said there.
It's an evolutionary force.
And then but PZ reads that as being like, well, these evolutionary psychologists are justifying.
Yeah.
And it's like, no, like an explanation for a phenomenon is not a justification.
If you want to solve a problem, you have to find the root causes.
Because in some of these papers, they talk in evolutionary terms, and when we're talking about evolution, we use words like benefit. Like, but the word benefit is used when we say benefit, we mean you do this and you're more likely to have more offspring relative to individuals who didn't do this thing.
Yeah, as opposed to.
PZ will highlight a paper, and he's like, they'll talk about like the benefits of forced copulations, and he'll be like, here's an example of an evolutionary psychologist like supporting rape. And It's like,
Yeah, that's
as a
crazy.
biologist, PZ, like you should know how we're using the word benefit. Like this is not the colloquial meaning of it. Like we're not saying
Yeah, like you're
it's
not getting laid. Woo!
it's not a beneficial thing to
Evolutionary
do
benefit.
by any stretch. But
Yeah,
like
not a
in
psychologically beneficial.
pure evolution, in pure like Darwinian evolutionary terminology, like it is. But I just don't understand how he can
Nuance.
be
Nuance is
and
dead.
not be able to see that. But he's a biologist.
Yeah.
Well, sort of. He only teaches biology. He's not an actual
Well, I
practicer.
mean, at some point he had to do
Yeah, he
research.
did have to do research at one point, but he doesn't do it
And he
anymore.
must be having to keep up on journal articles and stuff like that,
Yeah.
So,
You'd think,
yeah.
well, not necessarily.
No, he hasn't published anything in like 30 years, I think. But
Is
Yeah, okay.
that what you got into it with him on?
yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's quite the.
I think if you go through our archives, you'll probably find an interview with him.
Us, yeah, you will.
Yeah,
I'm
I think
sad.
it was-
guys interviewed PZ
our previous co-host
Yeah, a long time ago. Yeah.
and me and yeah,
on the same channel.
yeah.
Yeah, it's way,
was it? Would it be
way
or would
back.
it be
It
on-
wouldn't be the YouTube. It would be one of the audio ones and on iTunes.
Okay,
Way back.
on our
when.
website.
No. If you
Used
go
to
to
be great.
iTunes, you might
Okay.
find it. I'm not sure how far
I
that
used
is.
to go to his blog every day.
Me
It
too.
was fantastic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I remember triangulating polls and stuff like that. Like that was so
Yeah.
much fun. And now it's
That's
like,
a good
I
idea.
was doing it with him.
Yeah.
He used to have an interaction. You know who Jerry Coyne is?
Yes,
Yes.
I love Jerry Coyne.
Yeah.
He's another previous guest.
He's on our.
Yeah.
He'd be. Yeah. We.
Well, him and PZ used to have these fun back and forths, and PZ had his like cephalopod Fridays or whatever, and Jerry Coyne had his
Saturday.
cat a day, and it was just like this rivaling cat and cephalopod memes, and it was fun. But PZ just
then he became
disowned
something
him
else.
because Jerry Coyne talked about evolutionary psychology once or twice, and then PZ disowned him and just completely poisoned that
Well, he
relationship.
failed the
I remember
purity test.
Well.
He failed the purity
Oh yeah,
test.
big time.
And he's part of that torch and pitchfork mob. That you fail that purity test, the greatest amount of punishment must be inflicted for the smallest transgression. And that's what really bugs me.
Mhm.
And,
Oh,
And like I've kind of been part of the movement and gone to conferences since about 2010, and there was a time where you would have seen P.Z. Myers sitting around with Richard Dawkins, and
yeah,
but now I
forget
cannot
it.
imagine
I don't who's still. I
you know what I
don't know
mean?
anybody
Yeah.
who still follows PZ. They just got tired
Yeah, I
of his,
don't. Yeah.
his
I
idiotic.
mean, he's got
rhetoric.
he's got 160,000 Twitter followers. So.
Seriously, well, that I
Some people
think
are
I
wrong.
might be one, and that's because I want to
Yeah, I
see
am
what he's
too.
up to. Right?
Yeah,
I don't
I
want to
mean-
be in an echo chamber.
Well, he's got a rabid band of people. They're basically his group of sycophants that are just
minions.
Yeah.
That's about.
they're all insane too.
He's a high
Maybe
priest
I
of the
don't
cult.
want to be guilty of the foul. They're not all. Maybe there's some reasonable ones, but the ones I've interacted with have been completely impossible to talk to.
Yeah, evidence is out the door. It's gone. There's no room for evidence when it comes to upholding ideology,
Yeah.
and that's
So I remember that same when that interview took place years ago with our previous co-host. Previous
yeah.
co-host had said
That I
something like,
believe.
"Yeah, she believes referring to me. She believes in evolutionary psychology." Well, first of all, I wasn't all that that's not my field. Second of all, yeah, I do find some claims of it very compelling. Like I said, with GADSAT and marketing, that fusion of two fields is very robust in my opinion.
It's very, especially in marketing. It's very experimental.
that's what I'm saying.
There's-
Yeah.
It's objective data.
It's experimental, but it's also it's also got a well-established history. Like I said, sex cells, fear cells, right? And that can be done in positive ways. Like I remember there was a PSA for not texting and driving, and it was super emotional and blah blah blah, people dying and families getting upset. So the emotional appeal with a appeal of fear, that can be used in bad ways, but it can be used in really good ways too, right? Mm-hmm. So there's nothing wrong with that, and it's I think that's well established in marketing. So to bring to bear evolutionary psychology on it is just I wouldn't say self-confirming, but certainly there's, I guess I would say that there's, yes,
It's
that's
a
exactly
robust
what I'd
field.
say.
It's very, there might be an argument that at one point it was kind of just so stories.
Sexist.
Not anymore.
Yeah.
Sexist.
Yeah.
Sure.
And advertising sexist for sure, but that's why we don't have, like, I'm sure the advertising we're doing today, 20, 30 years from now, is going to be looked on as, oh my God, that's horrible. Just as we do, 2-3 decades ago from now, or, previously. So, you're damned if you do and you're damned if you don't. You just have to take the data at the time and do the best you can, right?
Yeah. I mean, it's worth pointing out that the premises of evolutionary psychology are absolutely true. That you should be able to look at certain traits of our psychology that are going to be adaptive, or not. So, like, a big criticism of evolutionary psychology is that they assume everything is an adaptation. This is in the last couple of decades.
Because it's cultural. It's cultural as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's all about forming. You have a certain trait that you identify in psychology, and you don't assume it's an adaptation. You hypothesize that it is, and then you design certain types of experiments or surveys or whatever, and you test it. And if it doesn't hold up, reject it.
And there would be
just going with the idea that they're all adaptations, but even if they're like some spandrel or some like secondary trait that's hitchhiked on one that's not adaptive, well, it's still interesting to test, because if it's still present, then it still has effects, and we need to be able to know its effects in the real world too. So even non-adaptive traits in our brain are still.
That's what I'm thinking. I'm thinking, like some stupid jingle for our fast food restaurants, is part of our culture that we go, I don't know, there's just, like, it's cultural too, but it's also, like, what is it about that particular catchy tune that sticks in everybody's brain, right? Yeah,
everybody
exactly.
recognizes that one, right?
Barry
Manilow,
McDonald's.
That's Barry.
Barry what?
Barry Manilow. Serious. He was
You have got a monster voice. I had no idea. I figured you could probably sing, but wow.
To hit that
He
high
did
note
Bohemian Rhapsody.
Bohemian Rhapsody, but I can't.
That's amazing.
Oh, wow.
You did really well.
My voice. I'm
Posted
starting
on
to go
your
Jack
channel.
Klugman. My voice doesn't take long before my voice starts to go in nowadays. It's not like the old days. Way back in the last century. Literally.
Oh God, that's true. That's funny.
All right. I think we could probably leave it here, and we'll invite you back on later on to talk about some of these other issues that we keep our eyes on.
Yeah.
Good old
Absolutely.
Pope Francis, and one of my favorites. We used to have a bishop here that was very outspoken.
Oh God, yeah.
He was a gift that kept on giving to this podcast. He's gone now.
I'll be talking to Paul Vanderklay. I don't know if you follow him on Twitter, but he's got a channel that he has good conversations on. I think he's a preacher, actually. I'll be talking to him.
Interesting.
Day after tomorrow, so it should be interesting.
Okay, cool.
I think we're gonna talk a lot about Jordan Peterson, but we'll see where that goes.
Wow.
There's some things I agree with Jordan Peterson on, and there's a lot of things that I don't. But
that's basically mine. We're gonna probe my disagreements, I think. So we'll see.
His theology is terrible. Sorry.
Can you send us a link?
I can send pop us a link at some point. Yeah.
I'll send you his channel. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Great.
He's good.
So we'll close it out and stick around for a second. And I'll just close out here.